and being willing to sit down and be open-minded. So thank you for everybody that's also here to listen and be a part of this conversation. That's huge to us.
Yeah, I think everybody in front of me kind of spoke pretty well. You know, the thing that I struggled to kind of notice in the beginning when I started as a community ambassador was facing the past and facing the trauma that police have caused, not only locally, but, you know, nationally and internationally as well. So I think that that is a big key element as well, is recognizing what has happened, speaking about what has happened, and how to talk about moving forward in a healthy dialogue together. And then sitting down and having really uncomfortable conversations sometimes, and kind of facing a fear and being uncomfortable and hearing things that you might not personally agree with, that I might not personally agree with. But that's the dialogue that we're trying to produce so that we can just continue moving forward as individuals and as a community to just strengthen the relationship, not only between us and the police department, but just with us and everyone, so.
Thanks, Chase. When I think of that first question, strengthening relationships, I think of relationships at a foundational level, and what it takes to maintain those, like trust and genuineness and authenticity. And I'm going to reference Barack Obama's task force on 21st century policing. One of those pillars was building trust and legitimacy. And I hope every day that we're working towards that with you together.
Okay, thank you. Now, since you brought up that word trust, second question, how can we work in concert to improve the trust factor between APD and the LGBTQ plus communities?
I think the thing we got to remember is the word trust. Trust is a two-way street. There has to be trust amongst the community, and there has to be trust amongst the police department. And we have to work with one another. We have to let our guard down, and we have to move forward, and we have to be willing to communicate with one another. You know, I think the Albuquerque Police Department wants to extend its hand. It wants to reach out. It wants to work with all segments of the community. But at the same time, we need hands to reach out back to us and say, let's work together for the better of the community, and especially for our own individual communities. I will tell you, one of the biggest things that I learned was in 2020, as we went through the height of the protests and the riots. I was a deputy chief. I was not chief, and we had a lot of incidents. I think it was 58 days straight that we got deployed. And one of the things I learned was that every day I heard a name, Tayberry, Tayberry, Tayberry. Every single protest. The day I became chief, I called Intel that morning and I said, I need you to track me down a phone number. I need to know who Tayberry is. 9 o'clock that morning, I made a cold phone call and I said, Mr. Berry, this is Chief Medina, I'm the new chief. Can we sit down and talk? And we made an agreement that we're gonna we're gonna meet at the Laguna Burger at 12th and Indian School. When I told my staff, everybody's like, Chief, you're not going by yourself. I'm going by myself. I'm the chief. I can do whatever I want. So one of my deputy chiefs said, well, I'll go with you. And we got to the Laguna Burger, and me and my deputy chief were sitting inside, and finally Tay and a gentleman by the name of Torrance Green came into the restaurant. And now, 2 years later, we laugh at the fact that they were outside wondering if there were more cops in other cars, and we were inside wondering, is there going to be a ton of people and is this going to be a fight? We sat down, we had a peaceful meal. And when I became permanent chief, Tay was my biggest fan that was cheering me on. As there has been national incidents unfold throughout this country, media always reaches out. And he always says how that's not a problem here because we communicate and work with one another. And he's called me about tough conversations. We've had officer-involved shootings that he has questions about. And he'll call me or Torrance and say, Chief, we need some answers. They generally have answers before the rest of the general public. And they always give me guidance on how to make sure that we explain everything to the community and that we look at ourselves also and see how we could become better. So trust is a two-way street. I had to trust that things are going to go well. They had to trust. And that reaching out has nothing but helped their organization and helped them advance more and more and get a place at the table with the police department and help make a true difference in giving their opinion and their ideas whenever we create a program or a new policy.
I think one of the best ways is community engagement. So for the past year, APD has shown up to pretty much all of our Albuquerque Pride Board meetings. And that community engagement and showing their presence and being at other events. One of the lieutenants was one of our judges for our Pride pageant. So being involved and showing their presence, I think, is what makes the difference.
I think to build trust is communication. You guys are all here because you have concerns, and we want to fix that. My biggest thing is we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we always had. So that's not going to happen anymore, and that's what I want you guys here, so we can change it.
So, you know, as Susie and as Chief were saying, you know, the trust factor comes with own personal accountability as well. You know, internalizing our own vulnerability and showing that we are vulnerable, right? To listen to what the community expects us to know and what the community expects us to be and how to act. And it's also just being vulnerable on the public end as well, you know, being in this room with us, sharing this time and this space to communicate about difficult conversations and feeling out of your comfort zone. You know, for me, I think improving trust is to show the human factor to who we are, right? That we're more than just a badge, we're more than just a gun, we're a human being that's trying to fix this continuous wheel of issues that policing nationally has always had, and that we're trying to be at least on top of the forefront of changing it here locally so that it impacts what we're doing nationally. Part of that comes with the vulnerability aspect, being able to open up about yourself and communicate how you feel, and even if you're uncomfortable hearing an answer that you might not agree with, you know, being able to digest that information and have a healthy dialogue moving forward to try to fix any areas of concern. Did you have something, George? Sure.
I'm going to second what Chase and Chief said about letting our guard down and being vulnerable. There were two things that I thought of when it came to trust, and one of those was demystifying our processes and building transparency. And I can speak to a couple of ways that we are doing that, but also we want to continue to do that. Within the tactical section, we work with members of the ID, and one of the specific complaints they had was that, hey, there's tanks rolling down our street and you guys are throwing grenades. We were able to have some very concerned community members come out with us and actually use some of these munitions and go over them and actually bring the armored response vehicle down to for them to see and talk a little bit more about what it was. And I think just that moment was able to build a little bit more trust based on vulnerability and transparency in our process.
Okay, next question. Can police officers play a role in LGBTQ activities, plus activities and public events, for example, parades, celebrations, and related activities? Why or why not?
You know, I think it's important that the Albuquerque Police Department stand together and be engaged in all members of the community, in all groups in the community, and be seen that they're working with them. That is how a community makes sure that they're represented, number one. Number two, that's how others who may want to harm that community sees that the police department is united and that they are there to help and work with others. So I think there's a lot of activities in a lot of ways. And I'll be perfectly honest, 2018, 2019, I walked in the Pride Parade in full uniform. Never heard a thing about it. I showed up with the mayor, I showed up with Councilor Davis, and I didn't know that there was anything wrong with that or that there was a concern with that until later when somebody told me, hey, there's some questions that need to be answered. And we respected that and we pulled back. But there are many individuals who told me, Chief, you've showed up as a deputy chief. What's gone wrong? And I said, we will respect others' space and we will pull back and we will wait until we're invited. And that was the decision that was made, and that was the decision that I held going forward.
So on this one, I've heard a lot of public concern about the capacity that APD can play a role in the parade. And it reminds me of other events like the Martin Luther King March, because there was a beautiful presence between the police department and the community there. And how we get our community to be at that level will take a lot. But if it's done within other communities, I feel like we can work towards something similar and that's something that I would like to see.
I think absolutely, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're gonna get to a place where you're all. Not everyone's gonna agree. We get that. You all have your opinions, but we're gonna get to a place. We're gonna build a relationship, and we want you guys to be involved.
I think absolutely that law enforcement needs to be involved in all community events. Obviously not to the point that it causes discomfort to the community, but we are all human. We all go home to loved ones. We're all very similar. I'm wearing a uniform. This is my job. This is not who I am as a person. We probably have a lot of similarities, and because of that, we need to be united. We cannot be segregated and expect to have a wholesome Albuquerque. You know, the mayor has his initiative, One Albuquerque, and I really think that at least for APD, it's our responsibility to embrace that. But again, we're all in this together, so I think that it is important for at least law enforcement and APD specifically to try to be involved in as much of the community events that we can be.
You know, the question really says police officers. I think I want to highlight something else within APD is I'm a civilian, and I work with a lot of other civilians at 911, the crime lab, our substations who work for APD and are LGBTQ. And so it's important for us to be able to feel like we can participate in events like that, even if we are part of this community. I belong to both communities. I started with 911 for 6 years, and I work with a lot of LGBTQ people up there who just want to make a difference and help people. And the polarization of police work and what law enforcement is to a badge and uniform over the last couple years, we miss out on all the other people who are kind of behind the scenes helping out and working towards a common goal who are LGBTQ, and officers in uniform that are LGBTQ as well. So being able to feel like we don't have to pick a side. We want to be on everybody's side, and we want to do what's right no matter what.
So, you know, for me, I attended Pride as an Albuquerque Police Department officer and held a table at the 2020 Pride. And for me, you know, we kind of walked into that sorry, it was 2021, right? Not 2020, sorry, got my dates confused. You know, we went into 2021's Pride, held a recruiting table, and had a lot of really positive interactions with people. However, you know, I was blinded to the fact that there may have not have been individuals that were respecting us being there or wanting us to be there in a safe and healthy space. And essentially, I was maybe blinded by it. I wasn't opening my eyes to recognize that there was community members within my own community that didn't want me to be there with the badge. And I respect that and I understand that. And so when it came to 2022, you know, we took a step back and we had a little bit of a road bump kind of, you know, going into 2022's Pride. I was definitely saddened to hear that we weren't able to be a part of it. But what I learned to understand is it's not up to me. It's not up to the Albuquerque Police Department. It's up to the community. And ultimately, building a partnership with the community is the ultimate goal so that we are respected to be at a Pride event. That takes time. That takes these kind of conversations. It takes these kinds of meetings. I know everybody up here is very for wanting to have us be involved in the parade. I would love nothing more than to represent myself, be happy who I am with my sexual identity, as well as being comfortable with who I am in my career field as well. That takes time. You know, obviously the police have a historic history of you know, community mistrust, and that's absolutely not a fact I'm going to strike down. So it takes time to build that relationship. So for me, I'm open and willing to continue motivating the work for it. I do personally believe that Albuquerque is ready to make that step. You know, we have shown a lot of progress with our police department, a lot of transparency going forward, but we know we're not perfect. We know that we haven't answered everybody's questions yet. We're a very dynamic city, and it's very hard to be super duper consistent on all the things that we do, just with where we are nowadays. But I believe that our department is ready to make that step along with the community moving forward.
I feel like the end guy, so there's always like a conclusion or a wrap up. But initially when I wrote a lot of notes, but I wrote, I don't know. And really it's up to the LGBTQ plus community. There are spaces where the public obviously wants us. Like if you need help and you're gonna call 911, you obviously want us there. There's spaces where you need us like that, and there's spaces where you don't. I also wanna support what Chase and Chief have said about committing to working within relationships. And we talk a lot about trust and respect. Another example I could think of, when you mentioned historical trauma, there's historical trauma within law enforcement agencies just as, I wouldn't say just as much, but it exists. So the example I wanted to share was from working with our Native American community tribal partners. We've been having a tribal and metropolitan public safety meeting for 2 years, thanks to Chief, and we got our first invite to a tribal nations quarterly meeting on a Native American reservation nearby, and it took 2 years, but we didn't give up. And so I think you can hopefully count on us to not give up and work through those hard times.
I just want to add one more thing. You know, when we asked that question, you know, I took a moment to look around and feel the energy from the room. I'm sure from online as well too. That's uncomfortable. I felt the reaction. I felt the energy that this community has about us being involved in these protected events. I see head nodding, and I agree with you, right? Like it's not, I don't want to overstep and overextend ourselves into this community if it's not ready for that time. However, what I don't want to stop is I don't want to stop at least building the blocks and the roadway ahead to getting towards that goal. Because I hope that that is a mission we can accomplish at some point into the future.
Okay, the next question is for the Pride Board. On a national level, there have been violent events directed at the LGBTQ plus community. What are your concerns about similar incidents happening here in Albuquerque?
You know, I think one of the saddest things is sometimes people look at us up here and they say, police officer, chief. They don't realize that we're also dads, we're also cousins, we're also friends, and we're also members of this community. I have several members, including a child who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I have cousins who are members of the community, and I've always been there for them. And I've also firsthand seen how many people here actually follow the police department. Other than just now, today. How many follow and know the ins and outs of what the police department's going through? How many people here remember my confirmation to chief of police? So one of the things I think to remember is, when I got confirmed to chief of police, what's the biggest question that came up? My son. And his background, and the fact that there are allegations, and that he's a member of this community. And I stood there, and I stood next to what I had to do was right, and I made sure that everybody knew what the truth was, and that what I had to do as a dad for my child, and stand beside him. So I think before we get wrapped up and we think that we know the Albuquerque Police Department or we know everybody that's up here, just remember, we're all still members of the community, we're all still parents, and we're all still a lot of things that are outside of the uniform.
So right now, nationally, we're seeing a lot of laws be passed. And those are things that I feel like we need to have a huge concern with. Right now, New Mexico did pass a lot of laws that protect our community, but it's something that we can't ignore what's going on nationally. And to have a proactive approach to build this relationship will only make our state a safer and better place for us to be.
Albuquerque Pride is a member of CAPI, which is Consolidated Association for Pride and Interpride. So I've been to multiple conferences, and I've been to Interpride Conference. And what we do is we work with other prides, the larger prides, San Diego, Las Vegas, Seattle, Washington. We work with other prides. At conferences, we have lawmakers come and talk. So this is something that prides across the world are working on to build a relationship, with their police department, to heal the community. And I just wanted everybody to know that it's not just something that we do. Some people think Pride is just a big party. It's not that at all. What we do, we want to celebrate everybody's difference, inclusion, diversity. What we also want to do, that's to create a safe space. But globally, we work with other prides to make a change. And I know it starts here with you guys, but if you address your concerns instead of waiting till you hear something on social media that aggravates you, and then, I get phone calls all the time for Albuquerque Pride. We have open board meetings every third Sunday of the month. If you address your concerns, everyone is welcome at our meetings, so we can fix what's happening locally, so then we can move it to nationally. It all takes time.
For me, this is, I'll keep it very short, but my biggest fear about events like this happening here in Albuquerque is that because of the historic relationship between APD and the LGBTQ community, crimes won't be reported. And that's something that is unacceptable for me. If somebody's hurting, if somebody's a victim, if somebody's dealing with something like this, I can't help them unless they report it. So my fear, or my biggest concern, is that there are crimes that aren't being reported to us.
Yeah, I think I agree with you as well. My whole part of my platform in joining this, being an ambassador for the Albuquerque Police Department, is that I feel like APD has a ton of underutilized resources for this community. And I don't worry so much nationally every day. I worry about the everyday crimes that are happening to individuals in this community who feel like they can't come forward because of their previous experience with law enforcement. And that's the narrative and the interactions that I want to work on changing, and that we've been working on changing. Chase can speak to this even more, once we've met with certain organizations in this community and made relationships with them. They have actually called us when something's happened to them because they didn't feel comfortable calling 911 or 242 cops. And I think that speaks a lot for itself, that, we have made trusted bonds with individuals, and we want to make sure that we're pushing that out to all the community and not just specific members moving forward.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking, what Kaylin vocalized, and that's actually kind of was going to be an answer for a question a little bit later on. But, I think the city in general, as well as underutilized resources, now with the expansion of Albuquerque Community Safety, ACS, kind of taking over a 24-hour role in the city, our direct involvement in dealing with members of the community, of this community specifically, that don't want a badge to respond to them to talk about an incident, is going to decrease. They're going to have a civilian, a social worker, somebody that's going to be able to go meet with them more one-on-one. They can feel more comfortable talking and exposing more information about an incident that happened to them without having to deal with a police officer. And I'm going to save the rest of my answer for another question that's asked a little bit later on, just about victimization of the LGBTQ plus community. So I'll hand it off. George, do you have something? Or?
When it talked about violent events directed at the LGBTQ plus community, I think of it as violent crime versus violent crime motivated by hate, right? And Chief talked about his children. Some others of us in the room are also parents, including myself. It's one thing to think about a carjacking that occurred at the playground where my kid goes versus a carjacking that occurred because of hatred out of someone's being, of who they are, racially, culturally, whatever their religion is. And so to sum that up with what are my concerns about similar incidents in Albuquerque, I guess on an existential level, I guess I realize, what can we do to stop them? But I can tell you that I've seen what we're capable of when these events do happen, and how we prepare and how we react and how we do communicate with the community. So.
Okay, next question. How can the Albuquerque Police Department better protect its community from similar incidents happening here?
You know, I think the first thing is there has to be that relationship. There are many times that we deploy resources. The moment that there is an incident affecting a lot of different protected groups within communities across this country, the first thing we recognize is that we have to create a sense of safety for everybody else, because it creates a fear throughout the community. When we had the series of homicides against the Muslim community this past summer, it was a Saturday morning at 5:30 when I got the first phone, in the morning when I got the first phone call from my commander that said, Chief, we picked up another homicide last night with a member from the Muslim community. By 7 o'clock, I had already spoken to the FBI, I'd already talked to the DA, and by 7:30, I was speaking to the president of the Islamic community. And we had differences. I mean, me and Assad had differences in the past. If you look, just 2 months earlier, I had made some statements about an individual on a double homicide being released, and this attorney threatened to sue me. There was not love. There was not a lot of love right there at the moment in time. But I knew that for the good of the community, we had to put everything aside and that we had to move forward. And we had a conversation that morning. And by that evening, we had resources at every single location that they had asked us to have resources at. And they stayed there until we got these individuals into custody. There's been other incidents. There's been other incidents across this country involving religious groups. And the moment that happens, the Jewish community will reach out and we will have resources everywhere that they ask us to have them to help reduce that fear that's created. So I think it's important that, number one, we don't just think of how we're going to prevent those incidents from here. And we monitor a lot of different platforms day in and day out to see if we see anything. We have an intel division that works with the feds to see if we hear anything. And we try to stay as proactive as possible, and we make a lot of contact with individuals beforehand if we think there's some kind of threat. So being proactive is one big piece, but after something happens nationally, reducing that fear is also a big piece. And I could only see us helping more and reducing those fears by increased engagement and working together with the Albuquerque Police Department. And those of you that don't know the ACS that they're talking about, that's the new Community Safety Department that sends civilians to take certain calls that don't require a law enforcement officer and that sometimes are better served by somebody outside of a uniform that's carrying a badge and a gun.
So, I think we kind of spoke a little bit about it earlier. I know Gerard brought up a good point, recognizing types of incidents or crimes that are motivated by hate. And I think the state, and I know Pete spoke about laws that the state has passed. The state and New Mexico is really proactive about, addressing civil rights issues, I think, relatively quickly before a lot of other states. I do see some heads in disagreement, so I do appreciate that. I'm not as educated on that topic, so I do appreciate you with vocalizing that. However, I do know that there is a hate crime law that was passed, if I'm correct in that statement. But because of that, the district attorney's office is working more directly with the Albuquerque Police Department in terms of identifying certain crimes that are motivated by hate, even backlogging some crimes that are motivated by hate, and then reapplying either mandatory prosecution sentences or upgrading the charge to a higher degree if we do determine that it is motivated by hate. I started in the department in 2018, and that wasn't something that I really knew that we did in 2018. It's really something that kind of took over after 2020. But continuing that as well, continuing on creating legislation and creating laws and working with the courts that if there are crime or violent instances that are motivated by hate towards one community group or an individual of a community group, ensuring that that individual is, held accountable correctly for it and a correct charge can get upgraded for it.
I just want to reiterate what some of the others have said and listen and follow through for sure. And I also don't want to be that guy who refers to quotes all the time, because I listen to that guy talk sometimes and I'm like, well, he just doesn't have anything of his own. But there's one thing that stands out for me, and the people are the public and the public are the police. So the question was, how can Albuquerque Police better protect the community? And there's no way we do it alone. So we have to listen to you and we have to work together.
Okay, your next question. When members of the LGBTQ plus community are victimized, how can APD advocate for them?
You know, this goes along with a lot of communities. I talked about the Muslim community, what we've done for them during the time of need. You know, I look back a couple years ago, and I was a deputy chief, and there was a symbol put on Central Avenue. And there are some individuals who went and defaced it on their motorcycles. How many of us remember that case? How many of us remember that there was a deputy chief who spoke out against it and who authorized and forced officers to work overtime that weekend to catch everybody that was involved? I believed in it since then, and I still believe in, and I believed in it before then, that we should get results. And when something is done, we should be there to make sure that we're making everybody feel supported and that we're there for them. And it was the right thing to do. And there was a lot of criticism at the time. Oh my God, it's a misdemeanor crime and you just devoted all these resources. To me, it was a big symbol of people attacking a group in the community. And that's why it was so important that we devote all those resources that weekend and that we get results. So I think that's the biggest thing, is we have to make sure that the community knows that we're there for them when something happens. And it goes back to what I said before. The Jewish community, there's an attack on us, on a Jewish facility somewhere in this country. They know they can call me. And I've gotten those phone calls on weekends. And they've said, Chief, we don't feel safe. And what do? We send resources. And I think that it should be that way also for your community. When you don't feel safe and something has happened, that you know you could pick up the phone and call me and say, Chief, we need help. Call Lieutenant Garcia, call Chase, and make sure that we get resources there. Because it's not only the crime that's being committed that impacts the community, it's that fear of things that are occurring nationwide. And is it going to happen to us next? And we have to stand together to make sure that that's not there. And it all starts with when hands are extended, that we're willing to take that hand, work with one another, and develop a relationship.
With this one, I really see the community engagement piece of this. With building these relationships between our community and the ambassadors, we can really have advocates in that way. So there's APD ambassadors for many different parts of our community, and you should get to know all of them. They're great assets, and beyond that, we can build a relationship with APD at a larger level as well.
I think when anybody is victimized, it all affects us, especially for me, for our community. I do think people need to report it. I do. I know a lot of people don't report it. I also think people need to address their concerns peacefully. They need to show up peacefully and not in anger, and I think that's how it's going to help. I know reporting it is a big thing.
I think the best way for APD to advocate for the community is to stand by their side. Like Chief mentioned, you know, when several situations have happened with some of our community groups, he's been there and he said this isn't going to happen, and he's provided all the resources that he can to help support the community. And I think that sends a very strong message to others, those who are doing the victimization, that we're not going to tolerate it and we're in this together.
So, you know, I've done this personally, you know, advocating for victims of this community. You know, I understand that it's not easy for a member of our community to just pick up the phone and call 911 and talk to just any Joe Schmo cop or anybody to report a violent incident that happens. So, you know, my understanding is I know that's not going to be, you know, we're all not going to leave this room tomorrow and go call 911 immediately and feel like everything's peachy key. It's not. You know, we understand that there's a long history and there's a long road forward to build trust with not only one police officer, but with multiple or an entire area command of police officers. You know, I had the instances where I worked with 2 individuals out of the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. It was a safe space that I met with Michael Trim, the director over there. I got to tour the facility, meet with him, his staff as well, and have a conversation very similar to this. I sat there and spoke with them about 4 to 5 hours, learning about the trauma, learning about the history, their concerns. But ultimately, I extended my phone number to him personally, my personal cell phone and my work phone number, so that any member of the community that uses that Center for Services has a question or a concern for a police officer or an incident that they need to report, they can call me directly rather than calling 911. You know, I do that as one part of my work with the Community Ambassador Program, but I also just do it because I feel like I'm trying to develop myself to be better understanding of this community. Even though I'm a part of it, you know, I don't know everybody. I don't know every aspect of it, and I'm still learning it, especially in this capacity as a police officer, trying to balance the two at the same time. You know, I don't encourage doing that for emergency incidences. You know, unfortunately, emergencies happen, and you need 911, and it's difficult to, you know, want to pick up the phone sometimes and call 911 when a violent crime or even a nonviolent crime or something emergent is happening. But something that we're doing as the police department is we are definitely incorporating a lot more advancements into our training. We're working on trying to do so. You know, working with Michael, understanding the trainings that his organization produces and puts out for not only the city, but for different organizations that we work with and different community groups that they work with. We want to sign up and take those trainings as well. I want to try to be as motivated as possible to get not only myself, everyone that's on this panel with our agency, but our entire agency under the same sort of lens and scope of taking the same trainings that we do, so that we can walk into these incidences at some point in the future with a better understanding of how to, you know, go about addressing the concerns that this community feels. You know, something that we also did as well is when the tragedy happened in Colorado Springs, you know, me and Kaylin, we spoke, and we needed to come together to try to do something. You know, but we understood that was a very sensitive time for our community, and that we couldn't just show up to everybody's events and just, you know, be right there in the moment with everybody. As much as I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to be there at the candlelight vigil as Chase and as Officer Jewel, right? But I understood that the community was very vulnerable at that time, and that maybe extending services or extending in a hand and offering services and offering help, if anybody needed it, you know, was what we ended up doing. You know, extending our phone numbers, our emails to the community, you know, speaking with individuals that work at our Family Resource Center as well to provide trauma counseling free of charge or anything like that to any victim that, you know, may be impacted by this here locally, is something that we were opening up to want to do. You know, I understood and knew that we weren't going to just walk into the candlelight vigil and expect to be there in open arms and, you know, be there with the community. But understanding and letting the community know that, hey, we are here, we want to advocate for you, but we need to take the steps through that roadway, communicate, talk, build some bridges, network, spend some time with one another to build that trust. And that's the biggest thing that I would say is we just got to continue to build the trust and re-encounter and re-engage the mistakes that we've made here locally and the mistakes that we've made nationally, and continue to work to address those.
The question, how can we advocate for someone from the LGBTQ plus community? I'm going to refer again to one of those foundational building blocks of relationships of listening. I almost feel like this question shouldn't be posed to me, it should be posed to you. I'll tell you, my wife's here tonight, and the way I advocate for her may change on a day-to-day basis. So if anyone in here was to be involved in a violent crime or any crime tonight, and I would have to learn about what time and space you wanted me to advocate for you for. It's a very unique experience, so I think just listening.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, and then we're going to open up from the, get some questions from the audience. Next question, how can we learn from the Stonewall riots and implement changes to improve treatment of others? So does someone want to explain what the Stonewall riots are?
You know, we all know, you know, that, I think it was 1969, you know, I'm sure New York City Police Department isn't proud today of what happened back then and how people were treated. And I think that's where we have to really take a look at and see where the Albuquerque Police Department is. When I came on this department, I didn't know one single person who was a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Not one officer would admit if they were. I worked with one officer for 8 years before he confided in his squad and told about 4 of us that he was a member. I remember that chief's overtime would give 4 additional chief overtime assignments for anybody who signed up for Pride Parade. I remember a time when our use of force for the whole community brought the Department of Justice to the city of Albuquerque. And I think back, and you think back of the impact of Stonewall, and I think the biggest thing we need to recognize about that was not about what the community was doing. It was about the culture that had been groomed within a police department. And that's where we have worked hard to make change. Earlier this week, I was notified by EFIT, who oversees our use of force investigations, that 98% of our use of forces are now within policy. That's huge. Department of Justice is asking us to be at 95%. We're 3% above what's being required of us. Last year, we had a series of officer-involved shootings. For the first time ever, our department sat there and looked, and we dissected it and came out with a list of 7 recommendations. We know that we have to have great relationships. We created an ambassador program and assigned people to work with each group of the community who wanted to work with us. That's the basis of the ambassador program. You look at Gerard at the end there yesterday, they drove all the way to Window Rock, Arizona, to attend a meeting with Navajo Nation. When I retired from APD, the first time I went on to become the chief of police to Pueblo of Laguna. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing I learned, that the past definitely impacts today. That is a culture that for centuries upon centuries have felt undervalued and have a lack of trust with the federal government because of how they were treated. This is a small window. I am very open as a chief. I hope I'm developing, and I pray I'm developing, and I look down here and I see lieutenants and officers that believe in this, that they're here on a Friday evening, that this culture will continue. But I ask this question: how many times has a chief brought his staff here to talk and have an honest discussion? Was that?
Isn't it once a year, every year?
I don't know, is it? Other chiefs have come? No. And I've been to other meetings with various different groups within the community. The relationships have to start somewhere. And I'm hoping that today that relationship can be. And I think it only impacts and helps betters. But if there's one thing about these riots, it had nothing to do with the community. It had everything to do with the culture that had been developed. And I think that there's a lot of progress that's documented about how the Albuquerque Police Department has changed, where it was in the past and where it is today. And I'm proud that all these officers are here today because they care.
I think Stonewall has taught us that we need to do better, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find ways to do better, trying to talk to the community, find out ways that we can do better, move forward, and work toward a better future. I think we keep saying generational trauma, and that is a huge, huge thing when that comes to law enforcement in this community. And we're open to ideas on how to work through that with the community and how to be better for the community. So I think that's important.
Yeah, like, one of my biggest concerns, right, with learning from Stonewall is I don't want to see Stonewall or an event like Stonewall happen again, specifically with this community. To its national recognition, obviously there are instances with police and this community that do go south. There are violent incidences that do happen. I won't diffuse that. However, I think that it is our responsibility as the police to step up to the plate and to be a part of this discussion, to learn from the community, hear how it impacted the community from the community, so that we can improve how we treat not only this community, but just the community in general moving forward.
whether it displays my ignorance or naivety. Part of being in a relationship is being honest. I will be honest with you. I know nothing about the Stonewall riots. I will tell you there is a time and space for you to teach us. Chief is very supportive of really any community group coming to our academy, coming to our trainings, and teaching us about important events that we don't know about.
You know, I think that one of the things that we can and have learned from Stonewall, but we need to continue to learn, is that the country's history, our laws have not always been fair, they have not always been equal, and we need to work together to ensure that we no longer have laws. Some of it's going on right now in other states, that they're creating some laws that I think are a little, they're wrong. I don't agree with, and I think that, you know, the question earlier about advocating, that's how we can advocate for the community, is to make sure that there aren't laws that enable this culture like occurred in Stonewall.
Okay, next question. What collective strategy can we develop to improve communications between the Albuquerque Police Department and the LGBTQ plus community?
You know, I think the biggest first step is us sitting here and us hearing when we're done with all these questions, all the questions back to us. And then us making sure that we're able to, as law enforcement, meet the needs of the community. I think that one of the things we have to always remember is there's always going to be a past. And we have to look and recognize that the most important factor is the future. And how we're going to work to make things better, not just for us today, but for the next generation. Because it's the next generation that's truly going to benefit or not benefit from what we're able to accomplish as a group. And I think that we have to remember that sometimes it's not about us today. I hope that this relationship flourishes, and in reality it may flourish when I'm not here anymore. I mean, there's careers end at a certain point in time, and eventually my career will also end. And I hope that whatever is built goes beyond that. And sometimes it takes time, but we're committed to this, and we'll continue to work towards having a relationship.
I think the strategy that we can really see is being here today. For us to have a space that we can share and be vulnerable and be open to address the concerns, the topics, the questions, anything that we want to see as what we make the strategy be. So I think we're taking the first step.
I know showing up is the biggest thing, and that's what we're here, we're showing up. And that's what myself and my board, we're gonna show up every month for our meetings. You guys are all welcome. Come and share your concerns, get involved. APD has shown up at all of our meetings, so showing up, and if you want change, you have to make it. Instead of complaining, be the voice that makes the change. And the Albuquerque Pride Board will help you. I haven't seen very many of you at the meetings. Again, I'll give you my personal number. You can show up at the meetings. You can info@abqpride.com. You know, you can call us. If you just show up, we'll work with you. We want to work with you. We want change. I can see some heads shaking, and we don't want that anymore. We want to work with you.
For me, the easiest way to improve communication is to listen. And when I say that, I mean we need to listen to you. But we need you to share your thoughts with us, your concerns with us, because I can't learn if nobody's willing to speak to me. So I'm just here asking you to please help educate me so I can better serve you.
I think that the collective strategy we've been working with the ambassador program, you know, showing up to Equality New Mexico meetings, meeting with GLSEN in the schools, and having these hard conversations every time we go. That's only going to improve our communication. It's going to get different viewpoints of different individuals and organizations in our community, and what resources we can provide, and also what we can learn and be taught, because I will tell you, even being in this community, I am still ignorant to a lot of things. So
Yeah, I think an important part of showing up, right, is not doing it once a year, or doing it once, every couple years, or once a new chief gets appointed. Something that I really credit, Chief Medina is he holds us really intensely accountable for showing up in our communities. I learned myself that I needed to show up more after 2021, with the Albuquerque Pride Board, and being more involved in this community and outreaching myself to more elements within this community, but just being more consistent on our public view and being out here in the public with you folks and being in a space where we can show that we are publicly trying to be better rather than just behind closed doors. Because I know we can tell you guys all day long that, oh, we communicate with all these community groups and we do this and we do that. We got to put, we got to put the evidence out there. And I think that being out here and being more transparent and showing face more and having more open dialogue, where the public is invited to participate and be an active member in this, is the strategy to go forward with.
Okay, this is our last question before we open it up to the audience. And I think that we all embrace diversity and inclusion. I think we've been talking about that. So the question is, how can the LGBTQ plus community assist the Albuquerque Police Department with its recruitment efforts?
The strength of a department is its diversity. And that is something that is important to us as a department. That's something that we practice every time we're recruiting. It's something we're looking for. And I think it's something that gives us credibility and trust within the community. And I think that one of the things we could use help with is finding individuals who would like to join the Albuquerque Police Department ranks from your community, but it doesn't have to be an officer. We have people who work crime scene specialists. We have people who work at dispatch. We have people who work at records. We have people who are officers. We have a lot of diversity within our department itself, and I think the biggest way to make change is to get involved, participate, and if we want change, we got to have representation. And the more representation we could have at APD, the more the change is going to come, and the faster the change is going to come.
I know that we all don't agree. I understand that, but I think the best way to assist the APD with its recruitment is to have them at our events. And again, and not everybody agrees, but it's a start. It's important that that we heal the city.
I think the way that the LGBTQ plus community can help us with recruitment, again, like Chief said, is diversity. But if you care, learn a little bit about us. I know Lieutenant Bartlett talked about working with some of our community groups and showing them what happens on a tactical demonstration and the equipment they use so they better understand it. But like I said, educating us just as well. We have the Transgender Resource Center that goes out, and we've coordinated it so they can speak with our cadets. They haven't done it in a couple of years, but I think they're gonna hopefully do it again this May and do trainings for us. That way it's easier for our recruiters. They understand how to properly address people. It's some of those simple things so that there is no uncomfortableness when somebody comes in, or they're fearful that they're going to be judged when they come in to apply for any position at APD. And I don't think I've ever told Kaylin this, but he was one of my favorite dispatchers, and I didn't even know him, I just knew him by voice. But he was one of my favorite dispatchers when I was a field lieutenant.
thank you. I feel like this one's a tough one. I think what Chief said, though, it's important now. If we want to make change, we have to make changes on both sides, and sometimes it has to be internal. And I worked for a department for the last 8 years in different roles and capacities that I've never felt like I couldn't be myself in this department. I've always felt like I've been respected, and people know who I am. And so I think that that's important, and that's something that we need to continue within our department as well, as letting other individuals know that if this is something you want to do or be involved with, we will respect you and you will be treated just like anybody else.
So, I'm going to answer this question as Chase. I'm not answering this question as an officer. I'm taking the uniform this off. When this question was asked, I saw the reactions. I felt the reactions. I felt the most criticism about joining this police department, not from the police department. I felt it from my own community. I felt like I have to even still hide myself of who I am, how I express myself, because I am a police officer. I joined this department and I joined law enforcement in general because I want to improve change, because I believe I have the skill set to try to do that. And I know I'm not the only one that feels that way, but I felt the most criticism from my community when joining. I am not very open at work for personal preferences, but primarily it's because I felt like I've pushed myself into a box, because if I let the community know what I do for a living, that I'm judged, I'm laughed at, I'm ashamed by my own community. And this question's built me a lot of anxiety, and I didn't want to answer this question. I didn't want to come on a microphone in front of a crowd of people and say, hey, I'm bisexual and I'm a police officer, because I'm not afraid of what my coworkers think of me. Many of my coworkers know who I am. I'm afraid of what my community thinks of me. I think how we rebuild recruitment efforts, it's a loaded question. It is. I don't believe anybody, regardless if they are in our community or not, are running to the hills to go be a police officer in this day and age. I understand that. There is a unique skill set for this career field that is changing. There's a new dynamic that is coming into policing, a new mindset that's coming in. People, when I joined the police department, I looked at myself and I didn't think I was a macho military guy that could be a police officer or anything super crazy like that. But then I realized that this is a passion that I have, wanting to help my community, wanting to be at the forefront of responding for calls. So I decided to take the risk and do it and sign up and do that. A thing that I've always pitched out to not only this community, but to anybody in general, are ride-alongs. I know it's an extremely uncomfortable experience to sit in a patrol car with a police officer, side by side somebody. I always have my passenger seat open to anybody that's willing to come out during like crazy graveyard hours, because I work graves, so you gotta deal with that if you do come out with me. But I'd love to do a ride-along with anybody in this room, or anybody in the community, or in any community that's interested in joining. And I think that that's the best way that we can create recruitment going forward. I don't think it's gonna happen overnight, but I wanna create a dynamic and a dialogue where people can understand me as Chase and know that, yeah, I might be in this community, I am in this community, I'm proud to be in this community, and I am also a police officer, and you can see what I do and how I do my job and how I hold myself to a higher standard than what is nationally said about police out there. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about that.
Okay, at this time, do we have any questions from the audience? Right here.
Hi, I'm Tank. I'm a queer satanic minister, and unfortunately, my contentious relationship with police began when I was 10, and officers ran over my friend Mike MacArthur. He was running away on his 10 horsepower moped, and both cars ran him over. And when I asked my grandfather, who was in law enforcement, I said, what happens now? He said, that's what happens when you run from the police. And unfortunately, that relationship has not matured with age. And I gotta say that as an olive branch, you guys coming out, I really appreciate it. Especially you, Chief. I did not expect to see you here, which is great, because I have a question for you. What is the department policy on the thin blue line flag and the Punisher flag with the thin blue line? Because I personally have been called faggot by individuals in vehicles with this on it. And like I said, I don't know what the policy is, but I do know that we have members of WAF and SS here, a domestic terrorist group, and some of their vehicles have been spotted toting that Punisher sticker. Now, I'm going to ask you guys for a gift for our community. I would like you to publicly denounce both, because my grandfather caught me wearing a punk rock shirt with an American flag that had a band name over it, and he slapped me right in the face because he was a field medic in France, and he saved so many lives for this country. And he would be ashamed of everyone who put that blue life flag on their vehicle. Now, I know it's probably against department policy to have it on department vehicles and in the department, but if we can encourage all officers, family members, and friends to denounce those symbols of division between us and you guys, it would be a boon for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, you're absolutely correct. We do have a policy. When I was a deputy chief, I made sure that every marked unit removed those plates. I was retired from 14 and 17. When I came back, I was blown away with what was on cars. There were football teams, there were baseball teams. I'm a huge Baltimore Raven fan. There's no Baltimore Raven plate on my truck. And I consistently ensure that we make sure that nobody's advertising anything. One of the difficulties we have is with our officers off duty is they are protected by the First Amendment. And we have been sued. And there are departments across the country who have been sued.
I was a commercial truck driver for a long time, and as a CDL driver, I had a code of conduct when not at work too.
I don't know what the time frame was when you were a truck driver, how Supreme Court rulings, and I just went through this class 2 weeks ago with the FBI. Like, they flew a group of chiefs out to DC, and this was one of the very topics. And controlling people's activities and behaviors off duty will cost the city of Albuquerque more money. And I invite you, check with the private attorney, but we simply cannot mandate and dictate what individuals do off of duty.
I get that, and I agree
Okay.
with you that you're not part of any white power group.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you can publicly say that we don't support this.
Don't support the flags and the,
Don't support those flags, because I see those on vehicles with low-key white power stickers, you know, the ones that say, hey, I'm an insecure white guy, but I don't have enough balls to put an actual swastika on my truck. You know, that, to say we stand with LGBTQ before we stand with you. Because your signs of hate are what causes the violence.
no, we will look.
Okay, let's just keep a little order. Okay, no, ain't no problem. No, everything is
No,
cool.
and we will look to see how we can, because we have in the past. I mean, we went through a series of, like, during 2020, we went through a series of protests. And 2021 went through a series of protests where we had to deal with that. Like, we had individuals who were driving around, and we had huge parades with the biggest 4x4 trucks with a certain flag of an individual who this week's world changed. It was very difficult. So we have had to make a stance, and we have looked at it. And I will work with our comms team to see what kind of announcements we can make or what we can do to put out. But we have stood strong, and we have stood with various members of our community. And that's all we're asking today is let us stand and let's give that united message that everybody should be treated equally and nobody should be preyed upon just because of what their religious beliefs are. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying, okay, you might want to continue maybe afterwards. We're going to finish at 7 o'clock, but we have other questions right here. No problem. No, it's all good.
Hi, thank you so much. I will try to be brief. I have a little bit of preempt and then the question. So my name is Danny. I'm a transgender, non-binary person. I also am an educator and established one of the first GSA groups in an APS middle school. I've worked with APS GLSEN and gave a talk about gender diversity in a community college class. But also, my father was a law enforcement officer in California for over a decade. And so I firmly believe that obviously any individual is allowed at Pride. I also believe that if a company or a corporation or a department wants to represent their department at Pride or any other event, they have to show that that department is willing to devote the time to support us outside of the fun stuff. And I believe that of any kind of corporation. I would also be equally dubious if Smirnoff was here, for example. I was happy to hear that Michael Trim was brought up. In a 2021 statement, he said that roughly 90% of the individuals that visit the TGRC have experienced some form of over-policing, harassment, and physical harm from law enforcement. However, I also know that it is difficult to kind of enumerate the trends of specifically officer-involved shootings in APD, which is a good metric for a civilian to judge police brutality likelihoods, mostly because the first OIS report that I could find, penned by the Civilian Force Oversight Agency, was published in 2015, but the one that I could find on the CAPQ website easily was from 2017. And 5 years of numbers, 5 years is a long time sometimes, but not for statistics, I'm sure you understand. And in fact, according to CABQ, the Albuquerque City Council only in 2022 passed an ordinance to create the city's Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Commission. What this all means is that there is not sufficient data to properly support the anecdotal data of the average LGBTQ plus person living in Albuquerque. But obviously numerical data is prioritized over anecdotal data by court of law and in general meetings such as this. With this gap of numerical data by APD, we can't confirm with statistical accuracy things that the queer community know to be true. It's unfortunate then that we have to rely on cultural context of the past and cultural and historical relevance to the United States, but not specifically APD. I hear that frustration of understanding that there is a cultural precedent of police distrust, but not necessarily something that someone might have experienced in Albuquerque, for example. However, until there is more data, both current and retroactive, I do not believe we can begin to address the core issues of APD specifically, and so we must treat APD as one branch of a larger, more rotten tree. That's the consequence of joining a police force in America. That is a choice, and a choice that an individual can change at any time.
Okay, can we have a question,
Yes,
please?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. Sorry. I wanted to know that I am dismayed about this conversation about moving forward. I don't like that phrase, how does one move on from trauma? How do we move on from and move forward from this trauma that is almost always exacerbated by interactions with law enforcement? This verbiage was not just used by APD, but also by Pride. You cannot, excuse me, I have a tremor. So, my question's twofold. Thanks for hanging with me. What is APD doing to reach out to the intersectional groups, including homelessness and the mental health community, that intersects with the queer community, specifically, please? And what is APD doing to refine its current and retroactive data in terms of OIS and brutality cases so that we can see the trend of APD for better or for worse? Thank you.
You know, I'm glad that the data question came up, and I think that there is some important data that we can show that violence of a police department, especially APD, is not what it used to be. And this data is not, I'm not presenting you data that is not available to the public, and I'm not presenting you data that has not been presented to the federal courts under our consent decree hearings. But if you go back just even to the last hearing, one of the things that the DOJ and the monitor complimented is use of force in the Albuquerque Police Department is down. And that is a fact. And one of the things that we know is that we did have a year with officer-involved shootings. And we were very open and transparent with the community about these 18 officer-involved shootings. And we recently released information on every single one. And there's one thing, I think it was like 86% of these officer-involved shootings, the individual was armed with a firearm. I think it was somewhere near 60% of the time they discharged the firearm during that interaction with law enforcement officers. So the perception that law enforcement officers for the Albuquerque Police Department are engaged in unlawful or excessive force and involved in more shootings than they need to is not a trend that the Department of Justice saw with 2018. Because, I mean, with the 18 OISs from 2022, because they have reviewed them. And they have not found a pattern or a practice. And we have also held people accountable to those. We have fired 2 officers. That's a statistic that you could research. One of them, we did hire back as a civilian, because it was a tough situation and a decision had to be made about this individual, and they still had a value to the organization. But they were held accountable, and we will continue to hold people accountable, and we will continue to review data, but there is a ton of data to show that the use of forces with Albuquerque are down. There's a ton of things that occur, and I invite you, come sit with us, let us have you talk to some of our individuals who work with individuals in mental health crisis. We're one of the few departments that pair a clinician with a mental health clinician with an officer, so we get dual response. We're also no longer responding to every single call of an individual mental health crisis. We're now pushing the vast majority to the first community safety department in this country to be announced. We've given that presentation, and we're asked to give it. We're going to be giving it to 75 other chiefs this coming April at Harvard University. So there's a lot of great things showing that we have relationships, we have processes for dealing with individuals in a lot of different places, whether it's mental health, getting the right resources out for people in crisis, making sure that we have the ability. And everybody who's heard me just yesterday, I made an announcement. You know, drug addicts need drug treatment, and we advocate for more treatment for individuals that have substance abuse problems. I've said it over and over. Individuals with mental health issues should be treated, and I pointed this out yesterday, with dignity and respect, because I see some supposed community members that just post pictures of people in mental health crisis that just disgust me. Like they're walking down the street half naked, and it's just very degrading to an individual. That's somebody's relative. And I've said it, violent repeat offenders should stay in jail. And I think that's the balance that we need as a community. And while I'll continue to advocate, but you have a very large question with a lot of different parts, and I know we have time, but I invite you, reach out. We have a great compliance bureau. I would like you to sit down with the person we hired to run all our statistics, Dr. Peter Valier. His job is to start creating the database and collecting the statistics that we want to report out to the community and improve our ability to do so. So when you're ready, just let us know, and we're more than happy to sit you down with Dr. Valier and let him talk to you about what he's creating for us in terms of advancing our ability to gather data.
Okay, we have a question there, and then we have a question here, okay? Then we get you two.
My name is Jaylene Quillis, and I'm actually a part of history with Stonewall. I was honored last year, 2022, with everybody at Stonewall, like Marsha P. Johnson. They even had a flyer of who we were around the entire Stonewall for over 6 months. That's who I am. I'm also one who provided Morningside, the first Monument Park memorial for our LGBTQI community in 2009. Right now, this is my 15-year title holder, which, you know, it's really sad because even in our own community, we have subdivisions. And I'm here to educate you because that's my job, with respect. But here, what I'm hearing is you're not talking about our trans community. You're talking about communities you know, and you haven't brought up one trans sister. And let me tell you about our trans community at Stonewall. It was a trans woman who didn't start a riot, who started protecting herself against the police. And let me tell you about also
Okay,
Stonewall.
let's hold it down, please,
I know.
please.
And that's okay for you to snap. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. But you didn't bring up anybody here to speak for people like me, trans, non-binary, who struggle every day, who trans women 4 times struggle more than cis women. You didn't bring up any of my sisters. And so therefore, I think that your due diligence is neglecting, especially with your report card. You know, Officer Medina, I have scars from your officers to show that I have been very vulnerable to all their basic needs, basic requests, only to be pummeled by 8 people. And I have a mugshot, unconscious. I was falsely arrested. And because of who? Because a white cisgender male called the police on me. And I have those scars to show you. That's how much vulnerable I am. So when you come to our community, and this is all with all respect, I get you have a gay son, I get you're a part of Pride, whatever, but we live it every day. We're not here to have performative, you know, action. We're effective action. And that means, you know what, standing up for people you love. I didn't see any of you standing up for LGBTQI youth leaders at the Capitol Friday, where the youth-led march was more than, you know, the biggest one of the youth-led march in the whole history. None of you were there. So, you know, like, I get you all didn't want me to speak today because my rights were very violated by the Pride Board and not even allowing me to speak for my own, for my life. And here you want to talk about people that you don't know. You want to assume. You had a training with TGRC. None of them are from New Mexico. And I want to apologize for my New Mexicans who had to miss Good Friday or whatever, you know, you had to miss today because there are New Mexicans here that are religious. So your job is to, you know, not hurt us. And I'm getting to my question. I'm just educating you.
Okay, but let's get to the question because we don't have, and we have other questions, okay?
My
Appreciate
question is, if you can't even give us our basic rights and also protect 15-year-olds like Brett Rosano, you know, from your own police department, what makes you think we want you at our Pride right now? That's my question.
Okay.
Our officers do their job every day. And if we're going to talk about the past and the information you brought about yourself, you know, I'll apologize for what's occurred in the past. But I said it from the very beginning. This is about moving forward. And we're never going to be a police department that's perfect. No organization is always going to be perfect. That you brought up some very complex situations, especially when you talk about the young man who lost their life in a house fire. And it's very difficult for me to comment on that because there's still pending litigation, but we were fully transparent about that. We did a full press conference about that. We walked the community through every single step on that incident and what occurred that day. And we will continue to look to see how we could make changes. And like I said from the very beginning, we are here to also learn. I think everybody up here said there is still more learning to be done. There are more things for us to improve upon. And we're here, we're ready to learn. And if there are segments that weren't covered today in a way that you
Okay,
would
okay,
appreciate
hold
it,
on, please, give us, okay. All right, but I'm just saying. Okay.
half blind and I have my glasses, so you gotta excuse me.
Okay, why don't you respond, you know, you can deal with that a
But
little
one of
later.
the things, like I said, so we said it from the beginning. It's about us moving forward, and if there's more for us to learn, we're here to learn it. We're here to understand it, and we're hoping that everybody here is willing to teach us and improve us and make us better.
Okay, we had a question right here. Okay. Did someone else want to respond to that? Okay. You, and then you be next, okay?
So myself and probably other people in the room have personal traumas due to APD. For many of us, this may or may not be a reason why or why not we will attend Pride. I have not attended Pride the past 2 years specifically because of 2021 with APD there. I do not feel safe around cops. I have seen my friends beaten by cops. I have had a family killed by cops. I have seen my mom in handcuffs for something that was completely not necessary. She was brought back to the car completely fine, no charges were filed at a young age. I do not understand why something as sacred as Pride, a protest and celebration against police, should be welcoming them into the spaces, and why you can't just have events like this, forums where people can speak freely with explicit knowledge that police are going to be here. Spaces made for queer people should not have people in there who are actively contributing to enforcement of laws that harm queer individuals. Whether it's here, whether it's in Tennessee, Oklahoma, anywhere, police are the enforcers. So, yeah.
Okay, point well made. Thank you. Did you have a question?
You know, the one thing I am going to add on to everything is I think everybody in this room fights for one thing, and that we be judged as individuals and not as groups. I think that is important, that we look and that nobody should ever be judged just as a group, that we should treat people with dignity, respect, and we should all—
Hey, hold it, hold it.
We sh-
Okay, okay,
we should all recognize that there is diversity within different groups. And I'm not going to sit here and say that every single law enforcement officer in this country is great. Not even going to say it about the Albuquerque Police Department. But I'm going to say that you have a group of officers here who care and want to listen. And I ask that we don't judge them because of the actions of others. All these officers here are trying to make a difference. They're trying to be better. And they're trying to improve relationships. And I ask, above all, give them a chance because Chase is there every month. He's engaged.
We'll get to your question. I want to give you your time. You know, before I was a police officer, you know, I've seen my dad had force used on him by APD several times. I've seen my dad get arrested. I've seen my dad and my mom get into things. I've been personally put into the back of a police car myself at a young age for interviewing, having injuries on me. So I'm not trying to say I understand, right? But I guess I'm trying to extend it an olive branch of relating in a way. And that's part of the motivating reason why I became this role, was because I knew that the way that it was handled with my dad was not appropriate at all, you know, and the way that they handled me was not appropriate at all, and I wanted to be part of that change. I also respect your point of you saying, like, why don't we continue this as an event? I agree, 100%. And if the notion is not there with the overwhelming people that are in this community that they don't want us in Pride, I respect that. I genuinely do respect that. And I will be the first to say I was blinded by the people that were not for us in Pride when I was there in 2021. I was sort of blanketed over by all the people that I did have positive interactions with, but there are a good chunk of people that don't want us there, and I respect that. So if this kind of town hall or these kind of events is what we need to do more of to get to that point at some point in the future, I'm for it.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
My name is Braden Diaz. I'm 16 years old. I'm non-binary. I am 2 days older than Brett Rosenow. I am privileged and lucky enough to not have had any negative interactions with the APD. I have not had any interactions with the APD, but I know people who have, and I know people who have been traumatized by the Albuquerque Police Department and by police in general. Pride itself was started by a protest against police, and you said it was the culture among police, but the police were enforcing the law at Stonewall, and the law that said that you cannot cross-dress, that that's illegal, and in some states those laws are coming back. Those laws, and the police serve as enforcers of those laws. If we were in Tennessee right now, or in Florida right now, or in Oklahoma right now, we would be talking about cops showing up at Pride not to support, but to arrest. To arrest people who are dressing in drag in front of minors, to arrest people who are violating whatever laws the state legislatures have chosen. And that's the duty of police, to serve as that extension, to serve as that enforcer of the state and what the state says and what the state wants. So while it's nice that that in New Mexico and in Albuquerque, where there are no such laws, that the police support us and that the police can support the community, that's not always the case. And in the future, when or if such laws would be passed, you would be the people enforcing them. How do we know that you claim to support us now? Let's say in the 2024 elections, people are elected who want to ban drag, or so true. Let's say in the 2024 elections, people are elected who want to ban drag and ban these things. How do we know that you're not going to be the people enforcing that? How do we know that you're not going to be the people enforcing these same kinds of laws that you claim to speak out against right now?
Chief, let me kind of respond to that. I think that, if we're talking about laws, I think one important thing we need to do is register to vote, go out and vote, send the people who respect your position. They're the ones who are framing the laws. So we have to make sure that, you engage in the political process. You want to respond, Chief?
You're absolutely correct. tomorrow, next year, there could be a big push at the legislature to make some crazy law. And the best thing that everybody could do is be united and speak out against it. In 2020, 2021, I was asked to support universal background checks at the state legislature for firearm purchases, private purchases. There were probably about 20 sheriffs there who were opposed to the bill. There was one police chief there that supported this bill. Last year, the Albuquerque Police Department was the sole agency that was fully supportive and spoke about House Bill 9, Benny's rule, and safe storage. Just this week, talked to the Deputy Chief of the Field that APD will follow that state law and we will buy a safe for every single one of our officers because we will be the example that we're not asking others to do something we're not. And if the day ever came when individuals are trying to pass laws, the biggest strength you could have is law enforcement being there with you, stating why these laws should not be passed.
Okay, thank you, Chief. We're at the end of our time. Okay, one last question. Okay, I'm sorry. We got to have you, you had your hand up. Go ahead. Okay, appreciate that.
I'll try to make it quick because my question was kind of related to what this individual had just said. But if you guys are there at the legislature with us, if something like this comes to pass and they do pass it, will you quit your jobs? Or will you not enforce it? Because if you can't say yes to that, we cannot trust you.
Yeah, 100%. Generally, I mean, that goes against my moral compass for sure. You all said perfectly, this job is a choice. It is a career I love and I'm passionate about, but we all have morals. That affects me too, and people I love and people I'm close with. So yes, I would.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is just the beginning. Obviously, we need some additional gatherings like this so we can have more time to spend time on the questions and to make sure that you get the responses that you need. So at this time, let's have some final comments, and then we're going to close down. So thank you very much for your attention. Any final comments?
No, the only thing I'll say is, you have an event in San Jose. I don't know about every single event. You have an event you'd like us to join you at, let us know. We're not afraid to go. If there's ever legislation, your question about